California wildfires, a story of devastation and struggle. The California wildfires are one of the worst disasters the state has seen. People are fighting to save their homes as flames rage across neighborhoods, fed by strong winds and dry conditions. As the fires spread quickly, the damage is unimaginable. People are experiencing the horror of seeing their homes burn down while they try to escape the flames. The story of what's happening is heartbreaking, and it shows how dangerous and uncontrollable these wildfires can be. One person in the video talks about the terrifying moment when they saw flames flying through the air, carried by the strong winds. "We saw flaming debris coming down the street," they said. "It was like driving through hell." The winds were so fierce that they made the fire spread faster, and people were struggling just to get away. Along the famous Pacific Coast Highway, PCH, homes were burning and power poles were falling over. It wasn't just the fires that people had to worry about. The whole area was in chaos. Gas lines were catching fire and things were exploding everywhere. This created a scene of destruction like no one had ever seen before. The heat from the fire was unbearable. Even inside their cars, people could feel the intense heat from the flames outside. One man explained how he could still feel the fire's heat even though he was far away inside his vehicle. "You can feel the heat from the flames, even from inside your car," he said. It was clear that the fire was too dangerous for anyone to stay nearby. The risk of getting trapped or burned alive was very real, and many people had to leave their homes behind in a hurry. As the fires got worse, residents knew they had to escape. Some were so desperate that they had to get help from others. One man talked about how he got a ride from a stranger to escape the flames. "A gentleman picked me up and took me the rest of the way," he said. This showed how, in moments of crisis, people are willing to help one another. The community was coming together to try to save as many lives as possible, even if it meant risking their own safety. But not everyone was as lucky. Some of the most heartbreaking stories came from families who lost everything. One such family was a couple who had lived in their home for 75 years. The wife was 90 years old, and she and her husband had always had fire insurance to protect their home. But this time, something was different. Their insurance company decided to cancel their fire insurance policy. Even though the couple had always paid their premiums, their insurance was canceled just when they needed it most. Now they were facing the fire with no protection at all. The couple had no way to rebuild their home if it was destroyed. They had spent nearly their entire lives in that house, and now it was all at risk. The wife described how difficult it was for them to prepare for something like this. "We've lived here for 75 years and we had the same insurance," she said. But despite their long history with the company, the insurance was no longer there to help them when the fire came. This is a sad reminder of how unpredictable disasters like wildfires can be and how vulnerable people can feel when they don't have the support they need. The experience of this couple shows how much people rely on their insurance to protect their homes and possessions. But when that safety net is taken away, the devastation is even worse. Not only are they losing their homes, but they also have no way to rebuild. The fire has already taken so much from them, and without insurance, they are left with nothing. This is the reality for many people in California as the wildfires continue to spread. As the firestorm continued to rage across California, more and more stories emerged from the people affected by the disaster. The situation was becoming dire. It wasn't just the homeowners who were facing life-altering losses. Entire communities were being torn apart as the flames roared through them, leaving destruction in their wake. People were forced to leave everything behind, from their homes to their prized possessions to their memories and livelihoods. Amid the chaos, there were reports of entire neighborhoods being wiped out in the blink of an eye. Some areas were so badly damaged that residents couldn't even return to check on their homes. The fires were still burning fiercely, and even those who managed to evacuate safely couldn't do anything to stop the flames. The toll on the environment was devastating, too. Acres of trees, wildlife, and natural habitats were destroyed, leaving behind a charred landscape where once there had been life. As the fires moved from one area to another, the stories of loss and despair continued to pile up. People who had just recently moved into their homes were devastated. Many had just finished unpacking boxes and setting up their new lives when the fire came sweeping through. Others had spent years building their dream homes, only to watch them burn to the ground in seconds. Some residents didn't even have time to grab anything before they fled. The urgency of the evacuation meant that there was no room for saving anything but themselves. One man explained that after he saw his neighbor's house go up in flames, he rushed to grab whatever he could. "I couldn't get everything," he said. "I just took what I could carry, my family photos, my important documents, and a few things I could never replace. But the rest was left behind, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever see it again." This sentiment was echoed by many others. People who thought they were prepared for a disaster found themselves in a position they had never imagined. The fire wasn't just threatening their homes, it was threatening their livelihoods as well. Many people in California rely on their properties for their businesses. Whether they own farms, small shops, or rental properties, these businesses were all at risk. For farmers, the fire meant losing crops, animals, and equipment. For business owners, it meant losing everything they had worked for. The economic fallout of the wildfires would be felt for years to come. Insurance payouts, where available, would take time, and some businesses might never recover from the loss. In the midst of this crisis, the lack of preparedness and response from some authorities became a topic of frustration. Many evacuees reported delays in the evacuation orders, leaving people trapped in dangerous areas longer than they should have been. Some expressed anger and fear that the officials didn't act fast enough to protect them. Others pointed out that the fire departments were stretched thin, trying to fight fires in so many places at once. The lack of resources and personnel made it clear that these fires were unlike anything the state had seen before. This delay in action had serious consequences. People were forced to fend for themselves, trying to escape the flames without much help. As more and more roads were blocked by the fires, some people had no choice but to find their own way out, even if it meant driving through areas still burning with flames on both sides. The dangers of the situation seemed endless, and it was clear that no one could predict how long it would take to get everything under control. Firefighters were doing everything they could, but the scale of the disaster was simply overwhelming. As the fire continued its rampage, the media coverage also brought more attention to the plight of those affected. News reports and videos showed the scale of the destruction and the human toll it was taking. Evacuations were happening across the state, but as the fires spread, it seemed like no place was safe. Communities that had once been tight-knit were now scattered, with people separated from loved ones and unsure of where they would go next. One heartbreaking moment in the video was when a family talked about how they couldn't reach their elderly parents in the chaos. "We tried to call them, but the lines were down," one of the children said. "We didn't know if they were safe or if their house was still standing." Stories like this highlighted how the fires were tearing families apart, as many were forced to evacuate without knowing what was happening to their loved ones. The situation seemed to be getting worse by the hour. As the sun set, the air grew thick with smoke and it became harder to breathe. Hospitals and shelters were overwhelmed with people seeking medical treatment for smoke inhalation and burns. Emergency responders were working around the clock to get people to safety. But it was clear that the situation was beyond anything anyone had prepared for. People were scared and uncertain about what would happen next. In the face of this disaster, the importance of community became more apparent than ever. Strangers helped each other out, giving rides, sharing supplies, and offering shelter. Neighbors who had never spoken before now found themselves relying on one another to survive. Local organizations and charities quickly mobilized to offer assistance, sending trucks filled with water, food, and other essentials to evacuation centers. Volunteers arrived from all over, ready to help however they could. But even with all the support and goodwill, the road to recovery was going to be long and difficult. The fires had not only destroyed homes and businesses, but had left deep emotional scars on those who lived through it. Families who had lost everything would have to start over, rebuilding their lives from scratch. For some, that process might take years. For others, the pain of the loss might never fully heal. Through it all, the question remained: how would California rebuild after this disaster? What steps could be taken to better prepare for future wildfires and prevent this kind of destruction from happening again? The stories of those affected by the wildfires are just the beginning of a much larger story, a story of resilience, recovery, and the challenges that lie ahead.